Naja stood stunned, watching what was happening, while her children stood with clear enjoyment, observing this circus unfolding before them. And on the wooden bed lay my brother, Raider, dazed and unaware of anything happening to him, while my colleagues, the medical scientists, were examining every millimetre of his strong body. Dr. Adel Shalaby, professor of internal medicine, checked his temperature and blood pressure, placed a watch on his chest and abdomen, then shook his head, gathered his belongings, and stood up. Dr. Mahmoud El Asyuti, professor of neurology, pricked him with a pin several times, struck him repeatedly with his hammer, felt the muscles of his jaws, then gave way to Dr. Mohammed Ibrahim, professor of psychiatry, who began observing him suspiciously and bombarded Naja with fevered questions he didn't wait to hear answers to. Did he tend toward isolation? What was my mother's relationship with my father? And then it was my turn. I reached out with a giant syringe and drew 10 centimeters of blood from his arm, placed it into a test tube containing an anticoagulant substance, and handed Dr. Allah, my student, a long list of tests to perform when he returned to the lab in Cairo. Then I went out with them to the courtyard and seated them randomly around the cups of black tea my brother's wife had prepared. And I said awkwardly, "I thank you for the trouble of travelling and all the time you spent for my sake." Dr. Mahmoud said, sipping his tea, "No formalities between us, colleague. No formalities." Dr. Adel said, "This is our professional duty. Sugar, please." I handed him the sugar box and the spoon, then cleared my throat and said, "And now, have you formed any kind of opinion?" A moment of silence followed. Then Dr. Adel said politely, "From my side, there's no issue. He's completely healthy. His nervous system is intact, and these are not recognizable psychological symptoms. But that means, if these colleagues claim there's no problem, then I am capable of putting them in a real problem. But there must be something wrong." Dr. Mohammed Ibrahim said as he lit his pipe, "Of course. And this thing has a name." "Of course, and to some extent it resembles symptoms of depression or hysterical muteness. But what exactly is it? No one can say for sure." "Then who can?" He said, exhaling the foul-smelling smoke from his pipe, creating thick clouds. "The issue is that we know nothing about what preceded this condition, the circumstances that led to it. And we don't have, and this is the problem, any narrative except his wife's fabricated story, which lacks scientific evidence." Then he pointed at me with his pipe and added, "For example, will this lady tell you about any emotional shock she might have caused him on that ill-fated night? Does she have any idea about his financial crises, disputes, or defeats?" Dr. Adel added, continuing the conversation, "Do you know, and this is crucial, what medications he's taking?" I said angrily, "And do you find any signs of addiction to a known drug? A drug that doesn't affect pupil dilation, the nervous system, or vital signs? And are you familiar with every type of narcotic? At least I know the ones that are likely to be found in a village like this. And I know my brother well. He doesn't use drugs, not even aspirin, and he's so cautious that no one could possibly slip anything into his food. Then the correct solution lies with his wife." Dr. Mahmoud cleared his throat, signaling his desire to speak. "If you want my opinion, may I speak frankly?" "Of course." He said, trying to avoid our skeptical glances, "I'm not comfortable with this harsh, domineering woman, and I believe she's playing some kind of psychological game with your brother that led to his collapse like this." I said, as I reached for the cup of tea, "But you didn't know my brother. He is the man of the house in every sense of the word. The only thing is that he loves her and tries to please her as much as he can. That doesn't mean she doesn't control him. And now she's in a position no one would envy. It's not in her interest at all for her husband to lose consciousness, especially in these days." Dr. Adel said, placing his cup back on the tray and murmuring a word of thanks. "Anyway, these are just opinions, and now we must act. It's time for my clinic, and we have a long journey back ahead of us. But we'll have lunch together." "No, let's leave that for another time, God willing." And so, in silence, I loaded them into my car, and we began the grueling journey back to Cairo. I was embarrassed in front of them and didn't dare tell them that their examination of my brother and their opinions had only made things worse. that what they offered me wasn't even worth the cost of the gasoline I had wasted on this dreadful trip. I had placed my problem in the hands of 3 of the top medical minds in Egypt, only for them to return it to me saying, "It's your problem." What a terrifying feeling. So I am alone, completely alone. At the entrance of his clinic in Bab el-Luke, Dr. Mohammed Ibrahim got out of the car amid a flood of my grateful thanks and headed for the door. Then he seemed to remember something and came back to me, leaning in through the car window and whispering, "Do you know?" "What?" "If I were in your place, I'd think more seriously about the legend of Al-Naddaha. Has it not crossed your mind that your brother may have been called by Al-Naddaha?" I returned to the village, absent-minded, and night had already spread its heavy darkness, a darkness I had never known in Cairo, a thick, sticky blackness that choked the breath, and my car's headlights could not pierce it. I reached my brother's house and knocked on the door. Naja let me in, her face showing signs of paleness, and she asked me anxiously, "Well, what did they say?" I shrugged hopelessly, then said distantly, "Nothing, just a psychological condition, nothing more." "Didn't they advise you of anything?" "Things that only concern doctors." "But why are you asking?" She said with a meaningful urgency, "I feel like tonight is the night." "The night for what?" "The night of departure. Listen to me, Naja. We're not going back to this again. I won't speak, come inside and see." I followed her warily as she carried the kerosene lamp, her shadow falling long, solemn and frightening behind her. With her, I entered the bedroom, but Reda wasn't in bed. "Then where is he?" She pointed with a trembling finger toward the window overlooking the dark southern field. There he stood, gazing into the darkness, his back to us, completely unaware of our presence. I approached him slowly and placed my hand on his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't react. His eyes were fixed and mute, and there was a tremble in his lips as if he was preparing for something. "Did you see? Ever since the doctors left, he's been like this," I said impatiently. "So what's the problem?" "He's just sick. That's all." She pursed her lips in difficulty and said, "They all go through the same thing. He's waiting for the second call." "Najat, there's no need for nonsense." Then I got up and went to my bag, which I had forgotten in his room. I took a syringe from it and asked her for water. In those happy days before the invention of AIDS and viral hepatitis, we used to boil glass syringes. Then I broke an ampoule of phenobarbital and took his arm and emptied the contents of the ampoule into his vein. He didn't resist, as if the needle were piercing someone else's veins. After a short while, his eyelids began to droop and his body relaxed. I looked at her with relief and said, "There you go. He'll sleep soundly until morning." "Are you sure?" "Of course. Even his caller won't be able to wake him." We worked together to lay him down on the bed. Then I gathered my things and was about to leave. She didn't try to ask me to stay with him, and I wouldn't have accepted even if she had. Outside, the pitch darkness was all around, and the sound of the field insects rose in a monotonous rhythm. I shut the car door and started the engine. Was that strange sound coming from the engine or what? No, it wasn't the engine. That sound was coming from far away, from the southern field. A deep, soft sound as if a woman were moaning, slowly, with emphasis on the syllables of the call. "Rah! No, that's not what she's saying." I turned off the engine to hear more clearly. Yes, I could almost swear that the voice coming from the darkness, from the distant fields that no human dares walk through at night, no matter how many lamps they carry, that voice was repeating with feverish insistence, "Rida!" Other patients. And now you must admit that I have an unusually strong nerve, and that my faith in science is unshakable, because, quite simply, after all that I heard and saw, I was not shaken at all. I returned to our home to sleep. I can't imagine what kind of fool I was in those days. But early in the morning, I didn't forget to pass by my brother's house to ask his wife how he was doing. Her face lit up as she said, "Thank God." He didn't wake up during the night? The caller called him several times, and he kept turning in bed, but he didn't get up. Wonderful. She said to me with a distant look in her eyes, "Why don't you give him that medicine, the injection, every night?" Not a bad idea, but it's not a solution at all. It's not a victory for a person to live his life under the influence of phenobarbital just so he doesn't hear the voice of the caller. And besides, it's a crime. A crime to push someone into addiction just so you can feel at ease. But what can we do to stop him from running away? I smiled in pity, bid her farewell, and left. As expected, news of my return to the village spread like wildfire, and immediately the narrow courtyard of our house filled with villagers who came carrying their pains on their shoulders, and mothers suffering from their children's diarrhea, and teenage girls troubled by freckles on their cheeks. The truth is, every living soul in the village searched his body for some ailment that would justify his presence for an examination. And of course, I didn't complain or charge a penny, because this is the unquestionable right of my village folk. This reminded me of my early youth as a rural clinic doctor. In the room to the right of the entrance to our house, I prepared something like a small outpatient clinic, and began practicing the secrets of my noble profession, while my sister started preparing tea for selected samples of the visitors. By afternoon, the pressure of work had eased and I had finished, so I decided to go up to my room to rest, in preparation for visiting my brother Reader at night. The door opened and 3 hesitant-looking men entered. The eldest of them said to me, "We need you for a house call, Doctor." I smiled and nodded. "Can this be postponed until the evening, please?" He said it in a deep voice, closer to a command, and they exchanged suspicious glances among themselves. These men are hiding something fishy, and as usual in movies, one of them has been shot during a battle with the police. But this isn't a movie, so I tried once more to dodge. "You have the health unit. Any amount you want." They were determined. In any case, the peasants of Sharkia are peaceful and generous, and there's no point in refusing to see their patient because they are as persistent as death itself, and I don't like quarrelling, at least not with the people of my village. All right then, let's go. I picked up my bag and went out with them. "This way, sir." There was a woman covering her face with a black veil, and a fair number of men sitting in silence and gloom, smoking and exchanging meaningful looks. Then came the same layout of mudrooms as in our house, and the ducks playing freely, and there was a foul-smelling entrance that led to a side room covered in mats, and on the ground lay a handsome young man in the prime of his life, staring at the ceiling with unblinking eyes. I asked them as I looked at the young man, "Is he the patient?" No one responded, perhaps as a reaction to how dumb my question was, so I decided to make it worse with an even sillier one. "What's wrong with him? As you can see. Since when?" A week I leaned over him but couldn't examine him, so I had to kneel beside him, and I began trying to rouse him, to no avail. The same damned symptoms. Is this an epidemic sweeping through the village? I reached for his wrist to check his pulse and found something horrifying, a coarse rope around his wrist tying him to a wooden stake driven into the ground. They had tied this young man like a wild animal to prevent him from escaping. What an idea. I lifted my eyes to the men standing around me and asked, Did the caller call him?" They exchanged looks of appreciation toward me. Then the eldest of them said with a pleased expression, "His mother says so. You heard her. And why did you summon me then?" "So you can confirm it or deny it." "Prove this? And how can I prove it when I don't believe a word of it? In what scientific book can you find an accurate description of the symptoms of the Naddaha illness?" I looked at the tired young man in awe. It's a terrifying legend, and the idea of this brutal restraint adds more horror to the horror. The journey of Ulysses crossed my mind, when he had to sail past the Rock of the Sirens, whose singing enchanted sailors, making them throw themselves into the sea to drown. Ulysses had to chain himself and his crew to the masts of the ship so they wouldn't follow the sirens' alluring call. Mythical human behavior is the same in Al-Sharkia as it is in ancient Greece. Anyway, I continued examining the young man. I pulled the robe up from his belly and found something. The marks of sharp fangs had torn the flesh below the navel, but the wounds had completely healed. And so I began to understand what was going on. I asked the men cautiously, "Does he drink?" "No. He refuses water completely." "Then bring me some water." They rushed with exaggerated enthusiasm to bring me a clay jug of water. They handed it to me with doubtful, surprised expressions at my eagerness to drink in such circumstances. I took the jug and brought it near his face. Then I began to pour the water slowly in front of his terrified eyes. And just as I expected, his face began to contort, a quick look into his eyes, a silent scream on his lips. Then he rose to his knees, howling and moaning like a wounded wolf. I pulled the jug away and began to calm him down. I stood up, gathered my belongings in silence, then gestured to the oldest of the men to follow me outside, and there, in front of all the onlookers, I said to him, "This isn't the call of the Naddaha, sir." "Then what is it?" "He has rabies." "Rabies?" "Yes, a rabid animal bit him on the stomach a few days ago. That didn't happen." "It did, and he probably ignored it and didn't take the anti-serum. Now he's in the final stages of the illness." "And the water issue?" "This illness used to be called hydrophobia, because the patient reacts violently to the sound or sight of water and convulses in a horrifying manner. Even air currents cause intense throat spasms." I lit a cigarette and continued, feeling proud of myself. "And this stupor is a symptom of the encephalitis that accompanies the illness." He didn't seem to understand a word I had said, and he wasn't interested in evaluating anything. All he wanted to know was, what should he do? "He must be transferred immediately to one of the fever hospitals in Zagazig." "But, immediately. His chances of survival are less than 50% by grace, but we must try. But immediately. This boy's life is now in your hands," one of them said harshly and defiantly. But his mother heard the Naddaha doctor. I turned to him in anger and shouted, "If you believe in the existence of the Naddaha, that's your business. But this boy has rabies. Do you understand that? And he won't live to see next Friday's prayer. So what should we do? Glory be to God. I told you, the fever hospital. And there were side discussions full of utter stupidity and ignorance. It was clear they wouldn't take him anywhere, and that I'd have to report to the station that they were detaining a critically ill patient. But deep down, I wished I could find an explanation for my brother's condition with such speed and ease. I know that no one has survived rabies in the history of medicine to this day, but my urge to find a solution for my brother was overwhelmingly strong. The discussions ended, and then the oldest man stepped forward and shook my hand firmly. "Thank you, doctor." "Now, how much is your fee?" I asked for an outrageous amount because I felt it was my duty to take revenge on these fools. Yet he paid it willingly and ordered one of them to escort me back home. Before I left, he said to me, "I advise you to believe in the Naddaha, because she only calls those who don't believe in her."